Listen, you want to know what absolute power really costs? Not the fairy tale version, the truth. King Draven Kaelor ruled an empire built on fear and blood, believed mercy made you weak, believed love was poison to a throne. Then a woman with forbidden magic touched what belonged to him. 3 wolf cubs, golden light, and everything he built started cracking from the inside. This is the story of how a monster learned to bleed. Stay until the end, hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. You're about to witness an empire burn. The storm hit Valedryn 3 days before King Draven returned from the Eastern Wars. Not the kind of storm that brings rain, the kind that smells like iron and carries screams across mountain passes, the kind that makes soldiers check their blades twice and mothers pull children inside before sunset. Seraphine Vale stood at the forest edge, her worn leather satchel heavy with bloodroot and nightshade, watching black clouds devour the horizon. 23 years old, and she already understood what most people spent lifetimes avoiding. The world didn't care about fair. The world cared about survival. Her hands were stained green from crushing medicinal herbs. Her boots were caked with mud. She was nobody. A healer born in a shack on the kingdom's edge where poverty tasted like ash and hope died young. The sacred forest loomed behind her. Ancient pines twisted toward the sky like clawed fingers. Soldiers wouldn't enter these woods. Said the trees remembered blood. Said things hunted in the shadows that armor couldn't stop. Seraphine went in anyway. She had patients waiting, a child burning with fever, an old man whose lungs rattled like stones in a cup. People who couldn't afford the royal physicians with their silk robes and contempt for the poor. The deeper she walked, the quieter the world became. No birdsong, no wind, just her breathing and the soft crunch of pine needles under her feet. Then she smelled it. Blood. Fresh. Too much of it. Her pulse kicked up. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But healers didn't have the luxury of fear. Fear let people die. She pushed through a thicket of thorns and stopped cold. A massive wolf lay dying in a clearing. Not a normal wolf. This creature was the size of a war horse, its silver fur matted with blood, its eyes glazed with pain. The royal companion beast. She'd heard stories, loyal to the Alpha King, bonded through magic older than the kingdom itself, and beside the dying wolf, 3 tiny cubs whimpered in the snow. Newborns. Eyes barely open. Their silver coats trembled as they pressed against their mother's cooling body. Seraphine's throat tightened. She'd seen death before. You couldn't practice medicine without becoming intimate with it, but this felt different. This felt like watching the world crack open. She knelt beside the cubs. They were freezing, starving, maybe an hour from dead. Her hands shook as she reached for them. That's when the power woke up. It started as warmth in her chest, then heat, then something that felt like lightning wrapped in silk, racing through her veins and exploding out her fingertips in waves of golden light. Lunar magic. The forbidden kind. The bloodline kind. The kind that got people burned alive in kingdom squares while crowds cheered. She tried to pull it back. Couldn't. The light poured out of her like water breaking through a dam, flooding the clearing with radiance that turned the snow to glass. The cubs' wounds sealed, their breathing steadied, their silver eyes opened fully and locked onto her face with terrifying intelligence. The magic snapped off as suddenly as it came. Seraphine collapsed backward, gasping. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her vision swam with black spots. The cubs crawled toward her, not with the clumsy movements of newborns, with purpose, with recognition. They knew her. Worse, they'd chosen her. She understood what that meant, what it would cost. Magic didn't appear without consequence. Power leaves a mark. Power draws attention, and kings don't forgive anyone who touches what belongs to them. Seraphine scooped up the cubs, shoving them inside her cloak. They were warm now, alive, purring against her chest like they'd found home. She ran. Branches tore at her face. Roots tried to trip her. The forest felt alive and angry, like it knew she'd stolen something sacred. By the time she burst out of the trees, her lungs were screaming and her legs were rubber. She didn't stop. Couldn't. Not until she reached the stone cottage where she'd hidden from the world for years. Inside, door barred, candles lit with trembling hands. The cubs tumbled out of her cloak onto the floor, immediately exploring every corner with puppy curiosity that felt obscene given what just happened. Seraphine sank against the wall, pressing her palms against her eyes. What had she done? What had she done? A war horn split the night, distant, deep, the sound of 10,000 soldiers marching home. King Draven was returning. Luck. The royal court of Valedryn operated on a simple principle. Strength devoured weakness, always, forever, without exception. Lord Chancellor Vesper understood this better than most. He'd survived 3 kings by knowing exactly when to bow and when to twist the knife. He stood now in the throne room, watching servants scrub dried blood off marble floors from the last execution, and felt nothing. Feeling things got you killed. The throne itself dominated the chamber. Black marble carved into the shape of wolves tearing apart a stag. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't meant to be. It was a warning. This is what happens when you challenge power. Vesper adjusted his crimson robes. The king would arrive within hours, which meant the performance was about to begin. Loyal advisors, dutiful subjects, everyone pretending they hadn't spent the last 6 months positioning themselves to survive if the Eastern campaign failed. The massive oak doors crashed open. General Kane strode in, armor still bloody from battle, his face carved from granite and violence. Behind him marched 20 royal guards, their expressions blank as corpses. Vesper bowed precisely 90 degrees. The angle mattered. Too shallow suggested disrespect. Too deep suggested weakness. General, the capital celebrates your victorious return. Kane's eyes were flat, dead. The kind of eyes that had watched cities burn and felt nothing afterward. The king rides an hour behind us. Prepare the court. Of course. The Eastern territories fell as expected. They fell. Kane's voice could have frozen fire. Some of them are still burning. He turned and left without another word, his boots leaving bloody prints on the clean marble. Vesper watched him go, then gestured sharply to a servant hovering near the shadows. Send word to Lady Evelise. The king approaches. She'll want to prepare her welcome. The servant scurried away like a mouse escaping a trap. Vesper allowed himself the smallest smile, the kind nobody could see unless they knew where to look. Let the games begin. Imam. Lady Evelise Mordaunt stood before her mirror, examining her reflection with the clinical precision of a surgeon studying a corpse. Beautiful. That's what people called her. Delicate features, perfect skin, eyes like winter ice that never quite reached warm no matter how bright the fire. She hated it. Beauty was a tool, nothing more. She'd weaponized it years ago, turning her face into a blade she could slide between a king's ribs whenever necessary. Her handmaiden approached, footsteps silent on thick carpet. My lady, His Majesty approaches the capital gates. Evelise didn't turn. Didn't need to. She'd practiced this conversation in her head 1,000 times. Is everything prepared? Yes, my lady. The spies are positioned. The eastern border reports are ready for your review. And there's something else. Evelise's reflection didn't change. Perfect control. Always. Go on. The handmaiden hesitated. Just a fraction. But Evelise caught it. There are rumors, my lady. Strange lights in the sacred woods 3 nights past. The royal companion beast went missing near the same area. Some of the servants are saying, what are they saying? That something happened to the beast, that the cub survived, that someone used forbidden magic. Evelise finally turned, her expression perfectly neutral, but inside something sharp and hungry twisted to life. The companion beast. Dead or dying, if the timing matched, which meant the cubs were orphaned, which meant someone had interfered with royal bloodline magic, which meant leverage. Find out everything. Use whatever resources necessary. I want to know who was in those woods. I want to know what they saw. And I want to know before the king does. Yes, my lady. The handmaiden fled. Evelise returned to her mirror. She'd spent 5 years playing the role of Draven's political queen, the alliance that kept northern territories from rebellion, the elegant creature who smiled through diplomatic dinners while memorizing every weakness, every secret, every pressure point. She'd helped him build an empire. Now she'd watch it burn, because love was meaningless inside palaces. Only leverage survived, only patience won, and she'd been patient for a very, very long time. 5 years ago, Draven's father had annihilated her bloodline to secure the crown, burned her family alive in their estate while she watched from the forest where her mother had hidden her, erased her name from history, told the kingdom that House Mordain had committed treason. Everything since then had been theater: the political marriage, the dutiful smile, the perfect queen who never caused problems. All of it revenge wrapped in silk. And now, finally, the first crack had appeared. Bum, she sang. King Draven Kaelor rode through Valedryn's gates at sunset, and the city erupted. Thousands lined the streets, waving banners, screaming his name. Some cried with genuine joy. Most cried because soldiers with crossbows watched from rooftops, and crying seemed safer than silence. Draven saw through all of it. He was 31 years old, and he'd stopped believing in loyalty before his 20th birthday. People didn't love kings. They loved the idea of kings. The moment you showed weakness, the moment the throne cracked, they'd tear you apart like starving dogs fighting over meat. His stallion was black as oil. His armor was obsidian plate, still crusted with enemy blood because he hadn't bothered cleaning it. Let them see. Let them remember what happened to kingdoms that challenged Valedryn. Let them remember what happened to men who forgot that mercy was weakness. General Kane rode beside him, silent as a tombstone. They'd known each other since childhood, fought together, bled together. Kane was the only man Draven trusted, which meant Kane was the only man who could destroy him. The general knew every secret, every doubt, every moment of weakness Draven couldn't afford to show the world. The Eastern Lords bent the knee? Kane asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. Eventually. Draven's voice was gravel and smoke. After I crucified the first dozen who refused, harsh, necessary. Draven scanned the crowds, all those faces twisted with fear disguised as celebration. Mercy is interpreted as weakness. Weakness invites rebellion. Rebellion costs lives. So I chose the lives that mattered. Ours. Exactly. They rode in silence until the palace loomed ahead. Black marble towers that made cathedrals look humble. Silver banners snapping in mountain wind that tasted like snow and iron. Home. Prison. Throne. All the same thing. Draven's jaw tightened as they crossed into the courtyard. 6 months of war. 6 months of sleeping in blood-soaked tents and killing men who probably had families waiting. 6 months of becoming more monster than man because that's what crowns demanded. And now he'd return to the throne room and pretend he was still human. The palace courtyard filled with advisors and nobles, all perfectly arranged in order of importance. Vesper at the front, bowing low. Evelise beside him, looking like winter incarnate in her silver gown. Draven dismounted. His boots hit stone and the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Vesper straightened with practiced precision. Your Majesty, the kingdom rejoices at your triumphant return. Does it? Not a question. Draven walked past him toward the palace entrance, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. Force of habit. Any emergencies require my immediate attention? Several matters, Your Majesty. Trade disputes, grain shortages in the northern provinces, reports of unusual activity near the sacred forest, border skirmishes that... Tomorrow. Draven's voice could have cut glass. Tonight I want silence and a bath that doesn't smell like corpses. Evelise stepped forward, her movements water-smooth and calculated. Welcome home, my king. She didn't try to embrace him. Smart woman. Draven didn't do affection. Their marriage was political architecture. She secured northern alliances. He secured her family's survival. Emotion had nothing to do with it. Lady Evelisa. He nodded once, the gesture dismissive. We'll speak tomorrow about border stability. Of course, Your Majesty. He started toward this palace entrance, exhaustion pulling at his bones. That's when it hit him, a feeling like a fishhook in his chest, yanking hard. Not pain, worse. Recognition. The bond he shared with his companion beast, the connection forged through blood magic and loyalty deeper than words. Except the bond felt wrong, twisted, like a rope being pulled by the wrong hands. Draven stopped dead, his pulse kicked up. He closed his eyes and reached for the connection, following the thread of magic that had always led straight to his beast. Nothing. The beast was gone. Not sleeping, not distant, gone. dead. And in its place, something else pulsed through the bond, something that smelled like moonlight and tasted like fear and felt impossibly, dangerously alive. His eyes snapped open. Someone had touched what belonged to him. Someone had interfered with royal magic, and they were going to pay for it in ways that made crucifixion look merciful. Your Majesty? Vesper's voice seemed to come from underwater. Are you unwell? Draven's hand tightened on his sword until his knuckles went white. Cancel tomorrow's meetings. His voice was too quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded executions. I need to investigate something personally. Vesper paled. Your Majesty, perhaps you should rest before... Draven turned, locked eyes with the Chancellor. Let him see the monster behind the crown. Now. Vesper bowed so low his forehead nearly hit the ground. At once, Your Majesty. Draven strode into the palace, Cain falling into step beside him like a shadow with teeth. What happened? The general asked under his breath. The beast is dead. Gods! Worse! Draven's jaw could have cracked stone. Something bonded with the cubs. I can feel it through the link, feel her. Her? Female. Young. Powerful enough to trigger royal magic. His voice dropped to something inhuman. Find her. Bring her to me. Alive. Cain nodded once and disappeared into the palace shadows like smoke. Draven kept walking, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Whoever she was, she'd made a mistake that would define the rest of her very short life. Because kings didn't share power, kings devoured it, and he was very, very hungry. Chase. Seraphine lasted 3 days before they found her. 3 days of hiding in her cottage while the cubs grew stronger, more alert, more impossibly intelligent. They didn't act like normal wolves. They moved like they understood language, like they were waiting for something, for her. She tried feeding them. They ate from her hands like she was their mother. She tried sleeping. They curled against her chest, purring in harmony that felt like music written in bone. The bond was forming. She could feel it, golden threads weaving between her soul and theirs, growing stronger with every passing hour. It terrified her, because bonds didn't break. Once magic claimed you, it owned you until death. On the third night, someone hammered on her door hard enough to crack wood. Seraphine jerked awake, heart in her throat. The cubs were instantly on their feet, growling with voices too deep for their size. Seraphine Vale! A man's voice. Military. Hard as iron. Open this door by order of King Draven Kaelor. The words hit her like a fist. She scrambled backward, her mind blank with terror. The cubs moved with her, forming a protective triangle around her legs. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Royal guards poured in like a flood. 10 of them. Armor gleaming in candlelight. Swords drawn. They surrounded her in seconds, their faces blank as execution masks. General Cain stepped through the ruined doorway. He was massive. Scarred. The kind of man who'd killed so many people he stopped counting. His eyes found the cubs. Narrowed. So it's true. His voice could have broken glass. You bonded with the royal heirs. Seraphine's throat closed. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only watch as Cain crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed her by the throat. Not enough to choke, just enough to make a point. Listen carefully. You're going to come with us. You're going to face the king, and you're going to pray he kills you quickly. Because if you make this difficult, I'll show you what we do to people who steal from the crown. The cubs snarled. Their eyes blazed silver like miniature stars. Cain glanced down at them. His expression didn't change. Try it and I'll snap her neck before you take 2 steps. They went still. But the snarling didn't stop. Seraphine found her voice. It came out broken and raw. I didn't steal anything. I saved them. Their mother was dying and they were... The king doesn't care about your reasons. Cain released her throat. Move. They dragged her out into the night. The forest watched. The stars watched. Nobody helped. Because mercy belonged to the weak, and survival belonged to the throne. The throne room at midnight looked like a cathedral built for demons. Candles burned in iron sconces, their flames casting shadows that crawled across walls carved with conquest scenes. The black marble throne dominated everything, cold and absolute and crowned with silver wolves that seemed to watch with hungry eyes. King Draven sat on it like he was born there. He'd cleaned the blood off his armor but kept the sword at his side. His face was all hard angles and colder eyes, the kind of face that made strong men look away. He watched Seraphine get thrown at his feet and felt nothing. No, that was a lie. He felt rage. Clean, pure, the kind that made empires burn. Leave us. The guards hesitated. I said leave. They fled like smoke. Seraphine pushed herself upright, her hands shaking. Her knees screamed from hitting marble. She could taste blood where she'd bitten her tongue. The cubs were with her. Of course they were. They sat on either side like miniature sentinels, their silver eyes locked on Draven with recognition that made his blood run cold. They knew him, but they'd chosen her. Draven stood, descended the throne steps slowly. Each footfall echoed like a hammer on a coffin. He stopped 3 feet away. Seraphine forced herself to meet his eyes. Brave. Stupid. Probably both. You saved them. Not a question, an accusation. Her voice was raw. Their mother was dying. They would have died too. I couldn't. You used forbidden magic. She flinched like he'd struck her. I didn't mean to. It just happened. The power woke up and I couldn't control it. And now they're bonded to you. Draven's hands flexed. Do you understand what you've done? Do you have any concept of the laws you've broken? I saved their lives. You touched what belongs to the crown. His voice cracked like a whip. You interfered with royal magic. You created a bond that threatens the entire structure of this kingdom's power. Seraphine shot to her feet, rage overriding terror. The cubs rose with her. Is that all you care about? Power? They were dying. I'm a healer. What was I supposed to do? Let them die because saving them might inconvenience your precious throne? The room went silent. Nobody talked to the king like that. Nobody. Draven stared at her, really looked at her for the first time. She was nobody. Dirt under her nails, clothes that had been mended a dozen times, hair tangled from being dragged through the forest. Nothing special, except her eyes. Her eyes burned with something he hadn't seen in years. Maybe ever. Conviction. The kind that didn't bend. The kind that got people killed. You have no idea what you're talking about. His voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. You live in a cottage in the woods gathering herbs. I rule an empire built on blood and fear. Don't lecture me about choices. Then educate me. She stepped forward. Insane. Suicidal. Explain how letting innocent creatures die protects your empire. Explain how power matters more than life. Because from where I'm standing, all I see is a man so afraid of losing control that he'd rather watch the world burn than admit he might be wrong. The words hit him like arrows. Draven's jaw tightened, his pulse hammered in his ears. He could kill her right now, snap her neck, feed her body to the wolves, erase this problem before it grew. But the cubs were watching him. His cubs, his bloodline, his responsibility. And they'd chosen her, which meant killing her might sever the bond, might drive them mad, might destroy the only connection he had left to his companion beast's legacy. Draven felt the trap closing around him and hated it, hated her. You don't understand power. His voice could have broken stone. Power isn't about what you want. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice to keep what matters alive. Every decision I make kills someone. Every law I enforce breaks someone. That's what ruling means. Choosing who suffers so the empire survives. And who decided the empire matters more than the people inside it? I did. He leaned closer, close enough to see gold flecks in her eyes, close enough to smell fear on her skin mixed with something else. Defiance. Because I'm the one wearing the crown. I'm the one who bleeds for this kingdom. I'm the one who becomes the monster so everyone else can sleep safely at night. So don't stand there in your moral certainty and judge me for doing what you're too weak to handle. Seraphine didn't back down. Her voice shook, but her eyes stayed locked on his. Strength isn't about domination. It's about protection. You've confused the two so thoroughly you can't tell the difference anymore. The truth of it carved into him like a blade. Draven turned away. Couldn't look at her. Couldn't stand the way she saw through him like he was glass. You'll stay in the palace. His voice went flat. Empty. Under guard. Until I decide what to do with you. You mean until you decide how to kill me? Maybe. He glanced back. Or maybe I'll find a use for you. Either way, you belong to the crown now. Those cubs are royal property, which makes you royal property by extension. Get used to it. He gestured sharply. Guards appeared from the shadows and grabbed her arms. Seraphine struggled. You can't just... I can do whatever I want. Draven's eyes were ice. I'm the king. That's what you still don't understand. There is no authority above me, no law that binds me, no mercy that saves you. I am the Empire, and the Empire does not forgive. They dragged her toward the door, the cubs following reluctantly, their eyes never leaving his face. Wait. Draven's voice stopped them cold. He crossed the throne room in 4 strides and grabbed Seraphine's chin, forcing her to look at him. You want to understand power? You want to lecture me about choices? Fine. I'll show you exactly what ruling costs. You'll watch every decision I make, every execution I order, every law I enforce. And when you're drowning in the reality of what survival demands, we'll see if your conviction survives. He released her and stepped back. Take her to the East Tower, Royal Chambers. She's not a prisoner. Cain appeared from the shadows. Your Majesty, is that wise? Draven's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. Wisdom has nothing to do with it. She thinks she understands strength. Let's see if she can stomach the truth. The guards dragged Seraphine away. The cubs hesitated, torn between her and him. Go, Draven said quietly. They followed her, leaving him alone in the throne room. Draven stood in the silence, feeling the bond pulse through his chest like a second heartbeat. She was right. He had confused strength with domination, had spent so long surviving that he forgot what he was supposed to be protecting. But admitting that would mean everything he'd done, every person he'd killed, every piece of himself he'd sacrificed. It would all be for nothing, and he couldn't afford that. So he'd bury the doubt, drown it in duty, become the monster one more time, because that's what crowns demanded, your soul, one piece at a time, until nothing human remained. Walk. Evelise watched from a hidden alcove as they took Seraphine to the East Tower. Not the dungeons, the royal chambers. Perfect. She'd spent 3 days investigating, 3 days tracking rumors and bribing servants and piecing together the puzzle, the healer, the cubs, the forbidden magic. It was better than she'd hoped, because Draven was compromised. Evelise could see it in the way his eyes followed Seraphine, could feel it in the way the throne room's energy shifted when she spoke. The unshakable king had found his weakness, and Evelise would use it to tear him apart. She moved through the palace corridors like a ghost, her silk gown whispering against marble. Her network was already mobilizing, spies in the kitchen, assassins in the guard, foreign contacts waiting for her signal, years of patience, years of smiling while fury burned behind her eyes, all of it leading to this moment. The empire Draven built on his father's sins would burn, and he'd die knowing that the woman he trusted most had orchestrated his destruction. Evelise reached her chambers, locked the door, lit a single black candle. In the mirror, her reflection smiled. Beautiful, deadly, patient. The game had begun, and kings always fell the same way, not to enemies on battlefields, but to the monsters sleeping in their beds. The East Tower chamber wasn't a prison cell. That's what made it worse. Seraphine stood in the center of a room designed for royalty. Silk curtains, carved furniture, a bed large enough for 3 people, windows that overlooked the capital spreading below like a map of conquest. Everything whispered wealth and power and control. She hated it. The guards had left her here with the cubs, who immediately claimed the bed as their territory. They sprawled across expensive fabric like they owned it, silver eyes tracking her every movement. Seraphine paced. 4 steps to the window. Turn. 4 steps to the door. Turn. Her mind raced through possibilities, and none of them ended well. She was trapped, not in chains, in something worse, royal hospitality that felt like a noose tightening slowly around her neck. The door opened without warning. A servant entered. Young woman. Terrified eyes. She carried a tray of food and kept her gaze locked on the floor, like making eye contact might get her executed. Your meal, my lady. I'm not a lady. The servant flinched. His Majesty's orders were clear. You're to be treated as royal guest. Anything you require. I require leaving. The servant's hand shook hard enough to rattle dishes. That's not possible, my lady. Then I don't require anything. The woman set down the tray and fled. Seraphine stared at the food. Roasted meat, fresh bread, wine that probably cost more than her cottage. Her stomach growled, but she didn't touch it. Eating felt like surrender. She moved to the window instead, pressing her forehead against cold glass. The capital stretched below. Thousands of buildings, hundreds of thousands of people, all of them living under Draven's crown, under laws enforced by fear and steel. From up here, it looked almost beautiful. That's the trap, isn't it? Power always looks better from a distance. Up close, you see the blood holding it together. One of the cubs patted over and pressed against her leg. She reached down instinctively, fingers finding soft fur. The bond pulsed, golden threads connecting her soul to theirs. She could feel their emotions now, curiosity, protectiveness. Something deeper that felt almost like loyalty. They'd accepted her completely, which meant she'd accepted responsibility for creatures that belonged to the most dangerous man in the kingdom. Seraphine closed her eyes. Her grandmother had warned her about this, about the magic sleeping in their bloodline. Lunar power passed down through generations of women who learned to hide it or die. Use it once, and you can't go back. That's what the old woman had said. Magic marks you, changes you, makes you visible to people who should never notice you exist. Too late now. The power had erupted and there was no shoving it back inside. No pretending she was just a healer from the forest. She'd saved 3 lives and lost her own freedom in the process. That's the cost nobody tells you about. Doing the right thing doesn't guarantee survival. Sometimes mercy just gets you killed more slowly. Draven didn't sleep. He stood in his private chambers, still wearing blood-stained armor, staring at his reflection in a mirror that had watched 3 kings destroy themselves. His father's face looked back at him. Same hard jaw, same cold eyes, same expression that said emotions were weakness waiting to be exploited. He hated it. Hated how easily he'd become the man he swore he'd never turn into. The bond throbbed in his chest. Constant, insistent, pulling him toward the east tower where Seraphine was probably pacing like a caged wolf. He could feel her through the connection. Her fear, her anger, her absolute refusal to break. It fascinated him. Most people crumbled when he looked at them, bent, submitted, understood instinctively that survival meant knowing when to bow. But she'd stood 3 feet away and called him afraid. The truth of it still burned. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Kain entered, still in full armor, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. The Eastern campaign reports are compiled. Casualties were acceptable. Territory secured. 3 minor lords executed for attempted desertion during the final siege. Good. There's something else. Kain's voice went careful. The servants are talking. About the girl. About why she's in royal chambers instead of the dungeons. Draven's jaw tightened. Let them talk. They're saying you're compromised. Are they wrong? Silence. Kain had known him too long, fought beside him through too many battles. The general could read him better than anyone alive. What are you doing, Draven? Draven turned from the mirror. His voice came out flat. Empty. I don't know. The admission hung between them like a blade. Kain's expression didn't change. That's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. Draven moved to the window, looking out over the sleeping capital. She bonded with royal bloodline magic. The cubs chose her over me. If I kill her, I risk severing the connection. If I keep her alive, she becomes a threat I can't control. So what's the play? I'm going to break her, show her what ruling actually costs. Force her to watch every brutal decision until that conviction dies and she understands why mercy is poison. Kain was quiet for a long moment. And if she doesn't break, then I'll have to decide which matters more, my pride or the Empire's stability. The words tasted like ash, because he already knew the answer, had known it the moment she looked at him without flinching. Pride meant nothing compared to survival. But admitting that felt like losing. Get some rest, Kain said quietly. Tomorrow you have executions scheduled, grain disputes, border negotiations. The Empire doesn't stop just because you're distracted. I'm not distracted. Kane's look said everything his words didn't. The general left. Draven stood alone in the darkness, feeling the bond pulse with every heartbeat. This is what power does. It isolates you, turns every connection into a potential weapon, makes you suspicious of anything that feels like weakness. And God's help him, she felt like weakness. The dangerous kind. The kind that made kings forget why they built walls in the first place. Morning came with blood. Seraphine woke to shouting outside her window. She stumbled to the glass, the cubs alert instantly beside her. Below in the courtyard, royal guards dragged 3 prisoners toward a wooden platform. Execution block, axe gleaming in early light. Her stomach dropped. A servant appeared at her door. Meals was all she said before vanishing. Seraphine barely heard her. Couldn't look away from the scene unfolding below. The prisoners were young, maybe 20. They screamed and begged while the crowd gathered. Nobles in expensive clothes, common folk forced to watch. Everyone understanding this was a lesson disguised as justice. Then Draven appeared. He walked onto the platform like death wearing a crown. No ceremony, no speeches, just cold efficiency. The first prisoner was forced to his knees, Seraphine's hands pressed against the glass. She wanted to look away. Couldn't. Needed to understand what kind of man could do this without flinching. Draven raised his hand. The executioner's axe fell. Blood sprayed across wood. The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Most just stood there with dead eyes, understanding that survival meant participating in horror. 2 more executions. Quick, brutal, efficient. When it finished, Draven's gaze lifted. Found her window, locked onto her face. Even from this distance, she felt the message. This is what ruling costs. This is the reality you're too naive to understand. Seraphine stepped back from the window, her breath coming in short gasps. The cubs whined softly, sensing her distress. She sank onto the bed, hands shaking. He was trying to break her, show her brutality until her conviction cracked and she admitted he was right. But he'd made a mistake. She'd grown up watching people die. Fevers that medicine couldn't touch. Injuries that healed wrong. Children who stopped breathing in the night. Death didn't shock her. What shocked her was how easily he wore it. How little it seemed to cost him. That's not strength. That's something broken pretending to be whole. An hour later, guards came for her. You're summoned to the war room. No questions. No refusal. Seraphine followed them through corridors that felt like walking through a predator's throat. Everything was black marble and silver, beautiful and suffocating. The cubs padded beside her, drawing stares from every servant they passed. The war room was massive. Maps covered every wall. A table the size of her cottage dominated the center, carved with battle plans and territorial markers. Draven stood at the head of it, surrounded by advisors and generals who looked at Seraphine like she was a disease. Lord Chancellor Vesper was there, elegant, cold, his eyes calculating. Lady Evelis stood near the window, perfect and poisonous. Her smile never reached her eyes. Seraphine stopped at the table's edge, refusing to bow. Draven's expression was unreadable. You wanted to understand how empires function. Pay attention. He gestured to the map. Northern provinces are starving. Grain supplies diverted to feed the military. 3 villages on the brink of rebellion. Vesper spoke up, his voice smooth as oil. Your Majesty, we could redirect supplies from the Western territories, though that would weaken our position against potential invasion. So we choose, Draven said flatly. Feed the North and risk Western collapse, or let villages starve and maintain military strength. Seraphine's hands clenched. That's not a choice. That's cruelty disguised as strategy. Every head turned toward her. Draven's eyes were ice. Educate us, healer. What would you do? Redistribute wealth from nobles who drown in excess while people starve. Tax the grain merchants hoarding supplies. Stop pouring resources into endless expansion and focus on the people already under your rule. The room erupted. Impossible. Vesper's voice went sharp. The noble houses would revolt. The military would fracture. You destabilize the entire power structure. Good, Seraphine shot back. If your power structure requires starvation to survive, it deserves to collapse. General Kane stepped forward. You don't understand politics. I understand people dying while you debate strategy. Enough! Draven's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. His gaze locked onto Seraphine. You think compassion solves this? Fine. Implement your solution. Take command of northern relief efforts. Negotiate with nobles. Manage grain distribution. Show me how conviction survives reality. Seraphine's breath caught. You're serious? Completely. You'll have 3 weeks. If villages are fed and the power structure holds, I'll consider your perspective. If the empire fractures because you prioritized feelings over strategy, you'll watch it burn. The trap was obvious. He was giving her enough rope to hang herself, forcing her into impossible choices so she'd understand why his brutality was necessary, but refusing meant admitting defeat. I accept. Draven's smile was cold. Cain will provide resources and escorts. Vesper will brief you on noble house politics. And I'll be watching every decision you make. He leaned forward, hands pressed against the table. Let's see if your conviction survives its first contact with power. The meeting dissolved. Seraphine stood there, pulse racing, understanding she'd just walked into a battle she couldn't win. Evelise approached, her movements water smooth. How brave. Her voice was silk wrapped around knives. Though I wonder if you understand what you've just agreed to. Seraphine met her gaze. I understand he's testing me. Oh, it's more than a test, dear girl. Evelise's smile sharpened. You've just accepted responsibility for thousands of lives with no authority to actually help them. When you fail, and you will fail, he'll have proof that mercy is weakness, and you'll have sacrificed your principles for nothing. Then I won't fail, Evelise laughed, soft, deadly. Everyone says that, right before they break. She glided away, leaving Seraphine alone with the maps and the terrible weight of what she'd just accepted. This is how power destroys you, not through violence, through impossible choices that turn conviction into ash. Psyche. 3 days into the northern relief effort, Seraphine understood why Draven looked like he carried mountains. She'd negotiated with 5 noble houses. All of them smiled while explaining why they couldn't possibly spare grain. Too risky. Too expensive, too politically complicated. She'd met with grain merchants who hoarded supplies, waiting for prices to rise while children starved. She'd argued with military commanders who viewed every resource as ammunition against future wars. And she'd watched Vesper sabotage her efforts with surgical precision. A delayed report here, a misplaced order there, nothing obvious enough to call out. Everything designed to make her fail. The cubs stayed with her through all of it, silent witnesses to her growing frustration. On the 4th day, she returned to the palace exhausted and furious. Draven was waiting in her chambers. He stood by the window, looking out over the capital like a statue carved from violence. You're failing, he said without turning. I'm being sabotaged. Welcome to politics. His voice was flat. You think I don't face this every day? Advisors with their own agendas, nobles protecting their interests. Generals who see the world as battlefields, then change the system. With what? Draven finally turned. His eyes were hollow. Hope? Conviction? Those last about as long as morning frost when you're trying to hold an empire together. You wanted to understand power. This is it. Drowning in problems with no good solutions while everyone around you waits for you to fail. Seraphine's hands shook with exhaustion and rage. So what? I just give up? Accept that people starve while nobles feast? You accept reality. Draven crossed the room, stood too close. Close enough she could see scars on his jaw. You make the least terrible choice and live with the guilt. That's ruling. Not heroics, not grand gestures, just choosing which suffering you can stomach. His voice dropped. Rough. Almost human. I've been making those choices since I was 19, since my father died and left me a throne built on blood. Every day I wake up and decide who lives and who dies, who eats and who starves, which villages burn so others survive. He looked at her like she was the last witness to his humanity. You think I don't hate it? You think I don't wish there was another way? But wishing changes nothing. Power demands decisions, and decisions demand sacrifice. Seraphine's throat tightened. Then why are you doing this? Why test me if you already believe there's no answer? Because I need to know if I'm wrong. The confession hung between them like a blade. Draven's expression cracked. Just for a second. long enough for her to see the exhausted man beneath the crown. I need to know if conviction can survive power, if there's a way to rule without becoming a monster, because if there isn't, he didn't finish, didn't need to. Seraphine understood. He was drowning, had been drowning for years, and she was the first person who'd ever suggested there might be air above the surface. "Show me the grain merchant records," she said quietly. "All of them, including the ones Vesper's been hiding." Draven's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because I'm not giving up." She held his gaze. "You want to see if conviction survives reality? Fine, but I do it my way, with actual information instead of sabotage." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression, something that might have been respect. "Cain will provide everything you need." He turned to leave. "Draven." He stopped. "Those executions yesterday, what did they do?" "Attempted desertion during the Eastern Campaign, tried to flee while their brothers died. So you killed them to send a message." "I killed them because mercy toward cowards gets loyal soldiers killed." His voice went hard. "That's the choice. Brutality that protects the faithful, or compassion that rewards betrayal, or justice that distinguishes between fear and cowardice." Draven's jaw tightened. "There's no time for nuance on battlefields. We're not on a battlefield now." "Aren't we?" He left. Seraphine sank onto the bed, the cubs immediately surrounding her. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear anymore, from understanding. He wasn't testing her to prove her wrong. He was testing her because he desperately wanted to be wrong, wanted someone to show him that power didn't have to devour everything it touched. That's the tragedy of absolute authority. It isolates you so completely that you forget other perspectives exist. You make decisions alone until you start believing you're the only one capable of making them. And then you become the monster you swore you'd never be. No. By the second week, Seraphine had uncovered something that made her blood run cold. The grain shortage wasn't natural. Someone was deliberately diverting supplies, creating artificial scarcity, driving up prices while villages starved. And the trail led straight to someone inside the palace. She spread the documents across her chamber floor, the cubs watching with unnatural intelligence. Shipment records, falsified reports, payments to merchants for supplies that never reached northern provinces. All of it signed off by officials who answered to the royal council. Someone was profiting from starvation, someone with enough power to hide it from the king, or someone who wanted the king blamed for it. The door opened. Evelise stood there, beautiful and cold as winter. "You've been busy." Seraphine's hand moved instinctively toward the nearest document. "These records, I know what they are." Evelas stepped inside, closing the door softly. "I'm the one who made sure you found them." Seraphine's pulse kicked. "Why?" "Because you needed to understand what you're really fighting." Evelise's smile was razor sharp. "This empire isn't collapsing from external enemies, it's rotting from the inside. And Draven either doesn't see it or doesn't care. You're behind this. The grain diversion, the sabotage. I'm behind survival." Evelise moved closer. "Do you know what his father did to my family? Burned them alive, erased our name from history, all to secure a throne that should never have been his. So this is revenge. This is justice." Evelise's voice went cold. "Draven inherited an empire built on murder. He maintains it through fear. And you think showing him compassion will change anything?" She laughed, soft, deadly. "He's not some misunderstood ruler waiting for redemption. He's a tyrant who's very good at making people believe he has no choice." Seraphine stood slowly. "If you wanted him destroyed, why tell me? Because you're useful." Evelise's eyes glittered. "You're the crack in his armor, the weakness he can't control. And when the empire finally fractures, I want him to understand that trusting you was what killed him." The words hit like poison. Seraphine's hands clenched. "I won't help you destroy him. You already are. Every day you challenge him. Every moment you make him question his methods. You're unraveling years of conditioning. And when he finally breaks, when he makes a decision based on emotion instead of strategy, the entire structure will collapse." Evelise moved toward the door. "Keep fighting for your villages, dear girl. Keep believing you can save him. It makes the fall so much more devastating." She left. Seraphine stood there, documents scattered at her feet. understanding she'd been playing a game she didn't know existed. Evelise wasn't just seeking revenge, she was orchestrating a war, using Seraphine as the weapon, turning Draven's first moment of vulnerability into the crack that would shatter his empire. And the worst part? Seraphine had walked right into it. This is the danger nobody warns you about. Sometimes the people you're trying to save are the ones setting the trap. Sometimes mercy is exactly what your enemies want. Merci. Seraphine found Draven in the training yard at midnight. He was alone, shirtless, scars covering his back like a map of violence, fighting shadows with a sword that moved like liquid death. She watched from the doorway, the cubs silent beside her. Every movement was brutal efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The kind of skill that came from years of turning survival into art. He sensed her presence, stopped mid-strike. You should be resting. I found something. Seraphine stepped forward. The grain shortage, it's not mismanagement, it's sabotage. Draven lowered his sword. Explain. She told him everything. The diverted shipments, the falsified records, the trail leading into the palace itself. His expression went carefully blank. Who? I don't know yet, but someone with access to council operations. Someone who benefits from making you look incompetent. Draven's jaw tightened. Evelise. You knew? I suspected. His voice was gravel. She's been too helpful, too supportive. People don't act against their nature without reason. Then why haven't you stopped her? Because I don't have proof, and accusations without evidence would trigger civil war. He set down his sword. So I've been watching, waiting, trying to figure out what she's really after. She wants you broken. Seraphine's throat was tight. She told me, she's using me as the weapon to crack your foundation. Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then he started laughing. Not humor, something darker. Of course she is. Of course. He looked at Seraphine with something that might have been admiration. You realize what this means? You came here to warn me, even though it proves I was right, even though it means your compassion was the vulnerability she exploited. Seraphine's hands clenched. Being right doesn't make you less of a tyrant. No. But it makes you less naive. Draven stepped closer. You wanted to save villages. Noble. Brave. And it would have worked if we lived in a world that rewarded good intentions. But we don't. We live in a world where kindness is a weapon and trust gets you killed. His voice dropped. She was right about one thing. You are my weakness. The first person in years who made me question if brutality was the only answer. And that hesitation is exactly what she needed. So what now? Seraphine refused to back down. You kill her? Prove that violence is your only solution? I protect the Empire. Whatever that costs, even if it costs what's left of your humanity? Draven's eyes were hollow. I lost that years ago. I don't believe you. The words hit him like a physical blow. For just a second, his mask cracked, long enough for her to see the man underneath, the one who hated what he'd become, the one who desperately wanted someone to prove there was another way. Then the mask slammed back. Believe whatever you want. He turned away. The Crimson Assembly is in 3 days. Every noble house will be here. If Evelise is planning something, that's when she'll move. And you'll be ready. I'm always ready. His voice was flat. That's what ruling means. Expecting betrayal from everyone, even the people you trust most. He grabbed his shirt, started walking toward the palace. Draven. He stopped. Thank you. For giving me a chance to try. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. Don't thank me yet. 3 days from now, you might wish I just executed you when I had the chance. He disappeared into the darkness. Seraphine stood alone in the training yard, the cubs pressing against her legs. Her heart was hammering, her mind racing, because she just realized something that changed everything. She wasn't trying to save the villages anymore. She was trying to save him, the brutal king who wore cruelty like armor because he'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable. The man who'd spent so long becoming a monster that he couldn't remember how to be human. And that was more dangerous than any political conspiracy, because fighting Evelise was strategy. But fighting for Draven's soul? That was walking into fire with nothing but hope that it wouldn't consume her. This is the moment you can't come back from. When you stop seeing someone as an enemy and start seeing them as a person worth saving. When conviction becomes something personal, that's when the real danger begins. Not from the battles you fight, but from the ones you fight for. The Crimson Assembly began at sunset. Every noble house in Valedryn packed into the Grand Cathedral Hall, dressed in jewels and ceremonial armor, pretending civility while sharpening invisible knives. The air smelled like expensive perfume and barely concealed ambition. Seraphine stood near the back, the cubs flanking her like silver shadows. She wore a gown someone had left in her chambers. Dark blue silk that felt like wearing a costume, like pretending to be someone she wasn't. Around her nobles whispered, their eyes slid over her with calculation and contempt. That's the healer, the one who bonded with the royal cubs. I heard she challenged the king in open council. Foolish girl, she'll be dead within a month. Seraphine ignored them. Her attention was locked on the front of the hall where Draven sat on a portable throne, looking like violence carved into human form. He wore black armor, silver crown, expression that could have frozen oceans. Beside him stood Evelise, perfect, elegant, smiling like winter incarnate. And somewhere in this room, hidden among loyal faces, were the people planning to destroy everything. General Kane materialized beside Seraphine. His voice was barely audible over the crowd. Stay close to me. When it starts, don't run, don't fight, just survive. When what starts? The general's eyes were hard. Whatever she's planned. Then he melted back into the crowd. Seraphine's pulse kicked up. Her hands went cold. The cubs pressed closer, sensing danger. Lord Chancellor Vesper stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. The crowd obeyed instantly. Nobles of Valedryn, we gather tonight to celebrate His Majesty's victorious return from the Eastern campaigns, to reaffirm our loyalty to the crown, to demonstrate the unity that makes our empire unbreakable. Polite applause. Dead eyes. Everyone performing the ritual of power. Draven stood. The hall went silent. His presence filled the space like a storm about to break. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner. Unity. That's an interesting word. It suggests we all share the same goals, the same values, the same commitment to Valedryn's survival. He descended the platform slowly, each step deliberate. But unity is a lie we tell ourselves. Because the truth is that empires are built on competing interests. Nobles protecting their wealth, generals expanding their influence, advisors securing their positions. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. So tonight I'm not going to pretend we're unified. I'm going to speak plainly about the rot spreading through this kingdom. Vesper's face went pale. Draven continued walking, moving through the crowd like a predator selecting prey. For months, northern provinces have starved while grain supplies vanished. Not through mismanagement, through deliberate sabotage. Someone in this room has been diverting resources, creating artificial scarcity, profiting from suffering, gasps, whispers, fear rippling through noble houses like contagion. Draven stopped, turned, locked eyes with Evelise. My queen. Perhaps you have insight into who might orchestrate such treason. Evelise's smile didn't waver. Her voice was silk. Your Majesty, I'm as shocked as everyone here, though I wonder if the recent distractions in your court might have created opportunities for such betrayal. She gestured delicately toward Seraphine. After all, when a king becomes fixated on a common healer, priorities shift. Focus weakens. Enemies notice. The implication landed like poison. Seraphine's breath caught. Every eye turned toward her. Draven's expression went carefully blank. You suggest I'm compromised. I suggest that power requires absolute focus. Evelise's voice remained perfect, controlled. And when that focus fractures, empires fracture with it. She moved through the crowd toward him. Your father understood this. He eliminated anything that threatened his authority. Family, friends, anyone who made him vulnerable. That's why his reign lasted 40 years. And look how he died. Draven's voice could have shattered glass, poisoned by people he trusted, alone, hated. Is that the legacy you're recommending? Evelise stopped 3 feet away. Her eyes glittered. He died secure in his power. You're dying slowly while pretending compassion changes anything. The hall erupted. Nobles chose sides instantly. Some moved toward Evelise, others toward Draven. The unity Vesper had praised fractured in seconds. Seraphine's mind raced. This was it. The moment Evelise had orchestrated, turning the assembly into chaos. forcing Draven to choose between brutality and weakness. But there's something deeper happening here, something most people miss about power and betrayal. It's not just about the throne. It's about identity. When you spend years becoming what everyone expects, the moment you try to change, the entire system rejects you like poison. Because change threatens everyone who benefits from the status quo. Draven wasn't just fighting Evelise. He was fighting the entire philosophy that built his empire. Draven raised his hand. Silence crashed down. If you have accusations, make them clearly. Very well. Evelise's mask finally cracked, revealing something cold and deadly underneath. You're weak. Your father built this empire through fear, and you're destroying it through hesitation. The Eastern campaign succeeded because I ensured supply lines held. The northern provinces starved because you prioritized a healer over strategy. She turned to address the crowd. King Draven has become compromised by sentiment, by a woman who challenges his authority, by cubs that should have been eliminated the moment they bonded with someone outside the royal bloodline. Seraphine's blood ran cold. Evelise continued, her voice rising. I have tolerated this because I believed he would recover, would remember what ruling demands. But tonight I'm asking the assembled nobility a simple question. Do we follow a king who governs through strength, or one who's forgotten that mercy is poison? Half the room erupted in support, the other half in outrage. Draven didn't move, didn't react. But Seraphine saw his hand tighten on his sword. And here's the trap nobody sees coming. The moment a leader shows humanity, everyone assumes it's weakness. But what if the opposite is true? What if maintaining brutality is the easy path, and choosing mercy while drowning in power is the thing that actually requires strength? Evelise understood the game perfectly. She just didn't understand that Draven was learning to play by different rules. Cain appeared at the king's side, weapon drawn. Your Majesty, give the order. Draven's jaw clenched. His eyes never left Evelise. This is treason. This is survival. Evelise's smile was razor sharp. Your father annihilated my family to secure his throne, burned them alive while I watched from the woods. Every smile I gave you was vengeance. Every alliance I built was preparation. And tonight, you'll understand what it costs to trust the wrong person. She gestured sharply. Hidden soldiers moved from the crowd. Not many, maybe 30, but enough. They wore royal guard uniforms, carried royal weapons, and their expressions were dead as execution masks. The nobles panicked. Some tried to flee. Others drew ceremonial swords that had never seen real combat. Seraphine's heart hammered. The cubs snarled, silver eyes blazing. Draven's voice cut through chaos like a blade. Anyone who draws steel against the crown dies tonight. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Your crown is already dying. Evelise's voice was ice. I've spent 5 years building networks, placing loyalists, securing foreign alliances. Half the royal guard answers to me, the eastern border captains, the grain merchants, the noble houses who understand that sentiment destroys empires. She stepped closer. You had one chance to be the king your father was, one chance to eliminate the healer and prove you still understood power. You failed. Draven's eyes were hollow. So this was always the plan. Use Seraphine as bait. Force me to choose between brutality and vulnerability. Watch me fracture either way. Exactly. Evelise smiled. Because there was no right answer. Kill her and prove you're still a monster. Keep her alive and prove you're weak. Either way, you lose. The trapped logic of it settled over the room like snow. This is the architecture of impossible choices. When every option leads to destruction, most people freeze. That paralysis is what breaks leaders. Not external enemies, not battlefield defeats, just the slow realization that there are situations where doing the right thing guarantees failure. That's when you discover what you're really made of. When survival and morality pull in opposite directions, and you have to decide which one matters more. Draven stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then he did something nobody expected. He laughed, not humor, something darker, more broken. You're right. He looked at Evelise with something that might have been admiration. You played this perfectly, used my first moment of weakness against me, turned my attempt at something different into the weapon that kills me. His voice dropped. There's just one problem. What? You assumed I'd choose between the Empire and her. Draven's hand moved to his sword. But you forgot the third option. He drew the blade. Silver steel that had ended kingdoms. I burn everything down and rebuild from ashes. The hall exploded into violence. Evelice's soldiers attacked. Draven's loyalists responded. Steel clashed against steel while nobles screamed and fled toward exits that guards had already sealed. Seraphine stood frozen. The cubs positioned themselves around her, snarling at anyone who came close. She watched Draven fight like death incarnate. Every movement brutal efficiency. No wasted motion. Men fell around him like wheat before a scythe. But there were too many. Evelice had planned too well. For every soldier Draven killed, 2 more appeared. His loyalists were outnumbered, overwhelmed. Cain fought beside him, both of them carving through enemies. But even legends bleed eventually. Seraphine saw it happening, saw the trap closing, saw the moment Draven's empire started dying. And this is where most stories lie to you. They tell you that conviction wins, that doing the right thing guarantees victory. But reality is uglier. Sometimes you make the brave choice and it gets you killed anyway. Sometimes mercy just means dying slower. The question isn't whether you'll win, it's whether you can live with yourself if you survive by becoming what you hate. Then something inside her broke. Not fear, not panic. Something deeper. The same power that had erupted in the forest. The lunar magic sleeping in her bloodline. She didn't try to control it, didn't try to aim it, just let it explode. Golden light flooded the hall, blinding, absolute, divine radiance that turned violence into frozen tableaus. Everyone stopped. Soldiers, nobles, Draven himself, all of them staring at Seraphine as power poured out of her like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. The cubs howled, their voices harmonized with something ancient, something that predated kingdoms and crowns and the brutal logic of empires. The light touched wounded loyalists, healed them, not gradually, instantly. Flesh knitting, blood stopping. Men who'd been dying seconds ago stood up whole. Evelice's eyes went wide. Impossible. Not impossible. Seraphine's voice didn't sound like her own, just forbidden. She stepped forward. The crowd parted like water. You wanted to use me as a weapon. Fine. But you forgot to ask which side I'd aim at. The power focused, concentrated, became something surgical. Evelice's soldiers collapsed. Not dead, just unconscious. The magic stripping away their ability to fight without killing them. Within seconds, 30 soldiers lay sprawled across marble floors, breathing, alive, defeated. The light vanished. Seraphine swayed. Her vision swam. Using that much power felt like bleeding from the inside out. The cubs caught her before she fell. The hall was silent. Dead silent. Everyone staring at the healer who'd just demonstrated power that shouldn't exist. Power that rewrote the rules everyone thought they understood. And this changes everything. Because power isn't about who's strongest. It's about who gets to define what strength means. For centuries, Valedryn measured power through domination, through fear, through the ability to destroy. But Seraphine just showed them something different. Power that heals instead of harms. Power that protects without killing. It's terrifying because it suggests maybe the entire system was built on the wrong foundation. Evelice's perfect mask finally shattered, revealing raw fury underneath. You've just proven my point, she spat the words. Magic that's strong doesn't belong in mortal hands, doesn't belong anywhere near a throne. Maybe, Seraphine's voice was raw. But it's here anyway, so you can keep fighting or you can surrender. I don't surrender. Then you die. Draven's voice, cold, final, absolute. He crossed the hall, sword still drawn, blood still dripping from the blade. He stopped in front of Evelice. You were right about one thing. My father would have killed her immediately. Eliminated the threat before it grew. That's what strength looks like according to your philosophy. His eyes were hollow. But I'm not my father, and I'm done pretending that ruling means becoming something inhuman. He raised his sword. For a second, Seraphine thought he'd execute Evelice right there. End the threat. Prove that brutality was still his foundation. Instead, he lowered the blade. You'll stand trial, face justice. Spend the rest of your life watching the empire you tried to destroy survive without you. Evelice's laugh was broken. That's worse than death. I know. Guards moved in, real ones, loyal ones. They grabbed Evelise with efficiency born from years of service. She didn't struggle, just looked at Draven with something that might have been pity. You think mercy makes you different, but it just makes you slow. One day you'll hesitate, and someone will put a knife in your back. That's the cost of trying to be human while wearing a crown. Then I'll pay it. The guards dragged her away. The hall slowly came back to life. Nobles whispering, soldiers securing the space. Everyone processing what just happened. Draven turned to face the assembled nobility. His voice carried. Anyone else want to question my authority? Anyone else think sentiment makes me weak? Silence. Good. Because tonight you learned something important. Power doesn't just come from fear. It comes from being willing to burn everything down rather than compromise on what matters. He sheathed his sword. The assembly is over. Go home. Tell everyone what happened here. Tell them King Draven chose mercy when brutality would have been easier. And let them decide if that makes me weak or terrifying. The crowd scattered, fast, desperate to escape before violence erupted again. Within minutes, the hall was empty except for Draven, Seraphine, Kain, and a handful of loyalists securing the space. Seraphine's legs finally gave out. She collapsed against a pillar, the cubs pressing against her. Every muscle screamed, her head pounded. Using that much magic felt like dying slowly. Draven appeared beside her, knelt down, his expression unreadable. You saved me. Not a question. A statement. I saved everyone. Seraphine's voice was barely audible. Killing her soldiers would have started civil war. This way they're just unconscious, can be questioned, dealt with without turning the Empire into a battlefield. Draven's jaw tightened. You shouldn't have that much power. I know. It scares me. Good. It scares me too. They looked at each other, really looked. Two people who'd been circling like enemies and somehow ended up on the same side. Because fear is honest. When someone admits they're scared, they're admitting they understand consequences, that they're not drunk on their own power. The most dangerous rulers are the ones who stop being afraid, who start believing they're invincible. Fear keeps you human, keeps you checking yourself. The moment you lose it, you've already lost everything that matters. Draven spoke quietly. Rough. You were right about everything. Strength isn't about domination. Power isn't about fear. I've been doing this wrong for so long I forgot there was another way. His hand moved, almost touched her face. Stopped. You made me remember. Seraphine's throat tightened. What happens now? Now we find out who else was working with Evelise. Draven stood, offered his hand. Because conspiracies this deep don't happen without help. He pulled her to her feet. Kain will start interrogations tonight. We need names, networks, everyone who knew and stayed silent. His voice went hard. And then we decide what justice looks like when half the court might be compromised. It ends. 3 hours later, Seraphine stood in Draven's private chambers while he paced like a caged wolf. Kain had just delivered the preliminary interrogation reports. The news was worse than anyone expected. Vesper was involved, the Lord Chancellor, the man who'd served 3 kings. He'd been feeding Evelise information for 2 years, helping her build networks, positioning loyalists, all while smiling and bowing and pretending absolute devotion. Draven slammed his fist against the table. Maps jumped, candles flickered. 2 years. He was in my war councils, my private meetings. Every strategic decision I made, he reported to her. His voice was raw. How many people did I execute based on his advice? How many villages burned because he convinced me they were rebellious? You didn't know. Seraphine's hands were steady despite exhaustion. That's not an excuse. Draven turned. His eyes were hollow. A king who can't see traitors in his own council is a king who deserves to fall. Stop! Seraphine crossed the room, stood directly in front of him. You're one person. You can't see everything, can't predict every betrayal. That's why conspiracies work. They exploit trust. So I should trust nobody. No. You should accept that being human means sometimes people will fool you, and when they do, you deal with it and move forward. Draven's laugh was broken. How? How do I move forward when I don't know who else is lying? You start with the people who've proven themselves. Kain. Your loyal soldiers. Me. Why you? Because I had nothing to gain from saving you tonight. No political advantage, no strategic benefit. I did it because seeing you die would have destroyed something I'm not ready to lose." The confession hung between them. Draven stared at her, then reached out and cupped her face with hands that had ended kingdoms. "I don't know how to do this. Don't know how to rule without becoming what I hate. Don't know how to trust after being betrayed by everyone close to me. Then we figure it out together." "Why would you do that?" His voice was barely audible. "Why would you tie yourself to someone this broken?" "Because broken doesn't mean worthless." Seraphine held his gaze. "It just means you're still under construction. And here's the thing. Nobody tells you about loving damaged people. It's not about fixing them. You can't fix someone who's been shattered by power and violence and impossible choices. What you can do is stand beside them while they rebuild themselves. Offer support without demanding they become someone they're not. That's the hard part. Accepting that healing isn't linear, that some days they'll backslide into old patterns, that progress is measured in tiny moments, not grand transformations." Draven pulled her closer, his forehead pressed against hers. "I'm going to fail, going to slip back into brutality, make decisions that horrify you. Probably. And you'll stay anyway? If you keep trying, if you don't give up on being better." His arms wrapped around her, tight, desperate. They stood there, two people choosing the terrifying path over the safe one. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. They separated instantly, years of survival instinct kicking in. Kain appeared in his doorway. His expression was granite. "We have a problem." Draven's hand moved to his sword. "What now?" Vesper escaped. The words hit like ice water. "How?" "Someone helped him." "One of the dungeon guards. We found the body. Throat cut. Keys missing." Kain's voice was flat. "Vesper's gone. And he took interrogation records with him. Names of co-conspirators, evidence, everything." Draven's face went blank. "Where?" "Northern provinces. He's already sent ravens. Declared you unfit to rule. Convinced 3 border lords to support him." "And?" "They're marching on the capital with 5,000 soldiers." Silence crashed down. Seraphine's blood went cold. Draven's voice was steel. "How long?" 3 days. Maybe 4 if weather slows them. Assemble the war council. Every loyal house, every general. We end this before it spreads." Kain nodded and left. Seraphine watched Draven's shoulders tense, watched him prepare to become the weapon his empire demanded. But something was different now. Before, he would have faced this alone, would have buried his fear and uncertainty and presented nothing but cold authority. Now he turned to her. "I need you with me. In the war council. Not as decoration, as advisor. I'm not a military strategist. No. But you see things I miss. Understand people in ways I've forgotten." His voice was rough. "And I'm done pretending I can do this alone." The admission cost him. She could see it. Because asking for help is the hardest thing for people raised to believe vulnerability equals death. Every instinct screams against it. Every lesson learned through violence says needing others makes you weak. But the truth is opposite. Isolation is what destroys rulers, not the enemies outside their walls. The inability to accept support from the people trying to help them survive. Seraphine took his hand, squeezed once. "Then let's go to war, together, together." The war council met in the Great Hall. 20 nobles, 10 generals, dozens of advisors, all carefully vetted by Kain over the past 3 hours. Maps covered the massive table, troop positions, supply routes, defensive fortifications. Draven stood at the head, looking like death wearing a crown. Vesper has convinced 3 border lords to rebel. House Corvin, House Thane, House Merrick. Combined forces of 5,000. They'll reach the capital in 4 days. General Kain pointed to map positions. "We have 7,000 troops stationed here, another 3,000 scattered across provinces. If we pull everyone back, we can field 10,000 against their 5. Lord Ashford spoke up, a young noble who'd proven loyalty during Evelisa's attack. "Your Majesty, pulling troops from provinces leaves them vulnerable to raids. We'd win the battle and lose half our territory, so we don't pull all troops." Draven's voice was flat. "We use what's here, 7,000 against 5. Better odds than I've faced before." "Those are rebel houses," one general said quietly. "Men we've fought beside. families with generations of service. Killing them will poison future alliances. Letting them march on my capital unchallenged will encourage every ambitious lord to try the same. The room went tense. Seraphine watched Draven struggle, saw him cycling through brutal options, calculating casualties, weighing loyalty against survival. Then she spoke. What if we don't fight them? Every head turned. Draven's eyes narrowed. Explain. Vesper convinced them you're weak, that choosing mercy over brutality proves you're unfit, so give them the opposite. Show them strength without slaughter. Lord Ashford leaned forward. How? We meet them in the field. Full military display. 10,000 troops in formation, every banner flying. Show them what they're facing. That's just theater, a general muttered. Theater matters. Seraphine's voice was steady. Vesper told them the king is compromised, soft, easy to defeat. But if they see the full might of the Empire standing ready, some will question. Wonder if Vesper lied. And the ones who don't question? Draven's tone was careful. You offer terms. Surrender Vesper and return to your holdings. No punishment, no executions. Just amnesty for being misled. The room erupted. Impossible. They committed treason. We can't just forgive rebellion. Seraphine waited for silence, then looked at Draven. Can you afford civil war? Extended fighting that drains resources and kills thousands? Or is it smarter to break the alliance without bloodshed and deal with Vesper alone? The logic was sound. Everyone knew it, but it required something most of them couldn't stomach. Mercy toward enemies who'd raised swords against the crown. Draven was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked. Then he spoke. We try it Seraphine's way. Full military display. Terms offered. If they surrender Vesper, they walk free. And if they refuse, Cain asked, then we kill every last one and make sure nobody forgets what happens to traitors. The coldness in his voice made it clear. He was balancing mercy with threat, offering peace while being fully prepared for war. That's the difference between weakness and wisdom. Weak rulers offer mercy because they're afraid to fight. Wise rulers offer it because they understand that some battles cost more than victory is worth. But they keep the sword sharp anyway, because compassion without strength just gets you killed. The council dispersed to prepare. Seraphine and Draven stood alone at the map table. You think this will work? His voice was quiet. I think it's worth trying. If it fails, you're no worse off than fighting immediately. And if it succeeds, then you prove Vesper wrong. Prove that strength comes in forms he can't understand. Draven's hand found hers under the table. 3 days. That's all we have. Then we make them count. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Valedryn. Inside, a king and a healer prepared for the confrontation that would either transform an empire or shatter it completely. And in the northern provinces, Vesper rallied his forces with promises of a weak king ready to fall. He had no idea what was coming, because the most dangerous rulers aren't the ones who never change. They're the ones who learn to adapt without losing what makes them formidable. And Draven was learning fast. 3 days passed like heartbeats before execution. Seraphine watched Draven transform from the man who'd held her in the darkness back into the weapon his empire demanded. He slept maybe 4 hours total, spent the rest coordinating troop movements, reviewing supply lines, drilling soldiers until they moved like extensions of his will. The cubs stayed close to her, always watching, always ready. On the morning of the 4th day, scouts reported rebel forces 2 hours from the capital. 5,000 soldiers marching under 3 banners. House Corvin, House Thane, House Merrick. Men who'd fought for Valedryn their entire lives, now convinced their king had become too weak to deserve the crown. Vesper rode at the front, visible even from distance, making sure everyone knew this was his rebellion, his moment. Draven stood on the palace walls, watching them approach. His armor was polished obsidian, his sword sharp enough to split air. Behind him, 7,000 loyal soldiers waited in perfect formation. The sight should have been reassuring. Instead, Seraphine felt ice in her stomach, because this is where strategies die, where careful planning meets chaos, and you discover whether conviction survives contact with reality. She'd convinced Draven to offer mercy, to try talking before killing, but talk only works when both sides want to listen. And Vesper hadn't marched 5,000 men just to surrender. Kain appeared beside them. His face was carved granite. They're deploying for battle, not negotiation. Draven's jaw tightened. We offer terms anyway. Your Majesty, they're not here to talk. I don't care. We follow the plan. The general's eyes were flat. And when it fails, then we show them why mercy was the smart choice. Draven turned from the wall, started walking toward the stairs that led down to the assembled army. Seraphine followed, the cubs padding silently beside her. You don't have to come, Draven said without looking back. Yes, I do. This is a battlefield, not a healing ward. Exactly. So you'll need me when it's over. He stopped, turned, looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. If this goes wrong, if they breach our lines, Kain will get you out, you and the cubs. There's a passage beneath the palace that leads... No. Seraphine stepped closer. I'm not running. Not from this. Not from you. We stand together or we fall together. That's stupid. Maybe. But it's my choice. For a second, something cracked in his expression, something human and terrified and desperately trying not to show it. Then the mask slammed back. Stay behind our front lines. Don't engage. Don't use magic unless absolutely necessary. The moment nobles see that power again, half of them will decide you're more dangerous than Vesper. Understood. They descended to the courtyard where 7,000 soldiers waited. The sight stole her breath. Rows of armored men, cavalry on war horses, archers with arrows that could punch through steel, battle standards flying in wind that smelled like coming storm. This was the Empire's true face, not palaces and politics, steel and blood and men willing to die for a crown. Draven mounted his stallion. The beast was massive, black as midnight, eyes that reflected firelight like burning coals. He raised his voice. It carried across the courtyard without effort. Today we face men who once fought beside us, men who believe I've become weak, that choosing mercy over brutality makes me unfit to rule. Silence. Total. Absolute. They're wrong. But I'm going to prove it the hard way. We ride out. We offer terms. We give them one chance to surrender without bloodshed. Murmurs rippled through ranks, and if they refuse, we remind them why Valedryn has never fallen. Not to external enemies, not to internal betrayal, not to anyone who forgets that this empire was built on the broken backs of everyone stupid enough to challenge it. His eyes swept across the assembled soldiers. No mercy for traitors who draw steel. No quarter for cowards who raise swords against the crown. But for those willing to lay down arms and walk away, we offer amnesty. He drew his sword. Sunlight caught the blade and turned it into liquid silver. Because strength isn't just about killing, it's about knowing when killing is necessary and when it's just waste. The army roared, fists hammered against shields, war drums started beating. Seraphine felt it in her chest, the pulse of violence preparing to break loose. The terrible energy of thousands of men ready to die for a king who'd finally given them something worth fighting for. Not just conquest, not just fear, but the idea that maybe, just maybe, power could be wielded without becoming monstrous. That's what changes everything. When soldiers stop fighting because they're afraid of punishment and start fighting because they believe in something. When loyalty comes from respect instead of terror, that's when empires become unstoppable. Not through brutality, through conviction. Draven looked at Seraphine, held her gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then he turned his horse and rode toward the gates. 7,000 soldiers followed. The armies met on the plains north of the capital. Open ground, no cover, nothing but grass and sky and the terrible mathematics of war. Draven's forces deployed in perfect formation. Infantry center, cavalry wings, archers in elevated positions behind. Across the field, rebel forces did the same. 5,000 men under 3 banners. House Corvin's Red Wolf, House Thane's Silver Eagle, House Merrick's Black Tower, and at the front, mounted on a white horse, sat Lord Chancellor Vesper. He looked exactly like what he was. A politician playing general. His armor was too clean, his sword too decorative. Everything about him screamed that he'd never actually fought in his life. But the men behind him were real soldiers, veterans, men who'd bled for the Empire and now believed that Empire had betrayed them. Draven rode forward, alone, Stopping 50 feet from Vesper's position, Kain started to follow. Draven raised a hand. The general stopped. Seraphine's pulse hammered. This was insane. Riding into potential arrow range without backup, trusting that rebel commanders wouldn't just kill him and end this immediately. But that's the gamble. That's what separates leaders from tacticians. Sometimes you have to put yourself at risk to prove you're not afraid, to show that conviction goes deeper than strategy. Vesper rode out to meet him. They faced each other across 20 feet of grass. Vesper spoke first. His voice carried across the field. King Draven, I'm surprised you came personally. Thought you'd send the healer to negotiate, since she seems to make all your decisions now. I'm here to offer terms. Draven's voice was flat. Surrender yourself. Disband your forces. Return to your holdings. No punishment, no executions. This ends without bloodshed. Vesper laughed. Actually laughed. You think I marched 5,000 men just to surrender? You think these lords abandoned their oaths just to turn around and bow again? I think they were lied to, told their king had become weak, unfit, compromised by sentiment. Draven leaned forward in his saddle. So I'm giving them a chance to see the truth. That mercy toward citizens doesn't mean weakness toward traitors. That offering amnesty once doesn't mean I'll offer it twice. His voice dropped. Colder. This is the only chance. Take it or refuse. But understand what refusal means. Vesper's smile was poison. It means we tear down a weak king and rebuild the empire properly. The way your father would have wanted. My father died poisoned and alone. That's what ruling through fear gets you. Your father died secure in his power. You're dying slowly while pretending compassion changes anything. Then let's test that theory. Draven gestured behind him. His army shifted. Perfectly synchronized. 7,000 soldiers moving as one. The rebel forces tensed. You have 5,000 men. I have 7. You have 3 noble houses. I have 10. You have Vesper's promises. I have the backing of every loyal house in the empire. He paused. The numbers don't favor you. Numbers aren't everything. Vesper's voice stayed confident. These men believe in what they're fighting for. Yours fight because they're afraid. Wrong. Draven's eyes were ice. Mine fight because I finally gave them something worth protecting. Not just territory. Not just wealth. But the idea that this empire can be better than the monster that built it. Vesper's smile cracked. Just a fraction. You're delusional. Power doesn't work that way. Never has. Never will. Prove it. Draven's hand moved to his sword. Draw steel. Commit to this. And watch how quickly your 5,000 becomes 2 when they realize they're dying for a lie. For a long moment, nobody moved. The entire battlefield held its breath. Wind carried the smell of fear and sweat across open ground. Horses stamped. Armor creaked. Somewhere a raven called. Then Vesper made his choice. He drew his sword. The rebel army roared. Weapons came out. Battle lines tightened. Draven sat perfectly still. His expression didn't change. So be it. He turned his horse and rode back to his lines. Behind him, the rebel army started advancing. And this is the moment everything changes. When talking ends and violence begins. When all the careful strategy and moral philosophy gets tested by steel and blood. This is where you discover whether conviction was real or just pretty words you told yourself to feel better about brutality. Draven reached his front lines, dismounted, drew his sword. Kain appeared beside him. Orders, standard engagement. Infantry hold center, cavalry flanks. Archers soften their advance. The general nodded. And Kain? Yes, your majesty. If I fall, get her out, whatever it costs. Kain's eyes flickered toward Seraphine. Then back to Draven. You won't fall. That's not an answer. The general's jaw tightened. I'll get her out. Good. The rebel army was close now. 200 yards, 100. Draven raised his sword. For Valedryn! The roar that answered shook the ground. Then steel met steel and the world became screaming chaos. But battle is nothing like songs describe it. There's no glory, no honor, just noise and terror, and the desperate struggle to survive the next 5 seconds. Seraphine watched from behind the front lines as men crashed into each other like waves against rocks. Swords carved through armor. Arrows found gaps. Blood turned grass into mud. The cubs pressed against her legs, snarling at the violence. She wanted to look away. Couldn't. Because this was the cost of her advice. Her insistence that mercy was worth trying. If Draven had just marched out and slaughtered rebels without offering terms, maybe fewer of his soldiers would be dying now. But that's the trap. Second-guessing decisions after violence starts. Wondering if brutality would have been cleaner, faster, less costly in the short term. That kind of thinking destroys you, because you can always justify cruelty by claiming it saves lives in the long run. That's how monsters are born. One reasonable compromise at a time, until you forget what you were trying to protect. Draven fought at the front, not behind lines like most kings. In the thick of it, sword moving like water, every strike precise, efficient, deadly. Men fell around him. Rebel soldiers who'd made the mistake of thinking mercy meant he'd forgotten how to kill. They learned different. Kain fought beside him, the two of them carving a path through enemy ranks like reapers harvesting grain. But the rebel forces weren't breaking. They pushed back. Hard. Experienced soldiers who knew their trade. House Corvin's veterans hit the left flank. House Thane's cavalry charged the right. Draven's lines buckled. Not breaking, not yet. But bending, straining, men dying to hold positions that might not hold. Seraphine saw it happening. Saw the eastern flank starting to collapse. Saw soldiers falling back, retreating. Terror replacing discipline. A runner appeared beside her, blood on his face, terror in his eyes. "My lady, General Kain requests you fall back to the palace. The center might not—" "Where's the worst of it?" "My lady? Where are casualties highest?" The runner pointed with a shaking hand. "Eastern flank. House Merrick's pushing through. We're losing ground." Seraphine looked at the cubs. They stared back with silver eyes that saw too much. She made a choice that would either save lives or doom them all. "Take me there." "My lady, I can't. Now." The eastern flank was dying. House Merrick had broken through the line. Their soldiers poured into the gap like water through a cracked dam. Draven's men fought desperately, but they were being overwhelmed. Bodies everywhere, wounded screaming, the smell of blood and fear thick enough to choke on. Seraphine ran toward it. The cubs followed, silent, deadly, ready. A rebel soldier spotted her, raised his sword, started forward. One of the cubs lunged, massive despite its youth, jaws closed around the man's arm. He screamed and went down. The other two cubs positioned themselves around Seraphine, snarling, warning everyone to stay back. She reached the wounded, didn't think, didn't plan. Just let the power wake up. Golden light exploded from her hands. It touched dying soldiers, healed them. Not gradually, instantly. Men with mortal wounds stood up whole and threw themselves back into battle. The effect rippled through the flank. Soldiers who'd been retreating saw their brothers healed, saw impossible magic saving lives, saw proof that their king had power beyond steel. They stopped running, turned around, fought back with renewed fury. The rebel advance stalled. House Merrick's soldiers faltered, confused, terrified. Watching men they'd just killed stand back up and come at them again. "That's not possible," someone shouted. "She's using dark magic. Forbidden power." "Not dark?" Seraphine's voice carried over the chaos. "Just power you're too afraid to understand." She moved through the wounded, healing, saving, turning certain defeat into impossible survival. The cubs stayed close, protecting her, tearing into anyone who got too close. And here's what changes everything about power. It's not about how much force you can bring to bear. It's about what you choose to do with it. Seraphine could have used that magic to kill, could have turned rebel soldiers into ash. Instead, she chose healing, chose protection, and that choice made her more terrifying than any weapon. Because destruction is easy. Any brute with a sword can kill, but healing mid-battle, bringing the dead back from the edge, that's divine. That's unstoppable. Word spread across the battlefield like wildfire. The healer, the one who bonded with royal cubs, she's healing our soldiers mid-battle. Impossible. Nobody has that kind of power. I'm watching it happen. Draven heard it, saw golden light flashing on the eastern flank. His expression went blank, terror and fury, and something deeper fighting for control. He cut through 3 rebels without looking, started moving toward Seraphine's position. Kain grabbed his arm. "Your Majesty, you can't abandon the center. She's exposed, vulnerable. If they target her, then our soldiers will protect her." Kain's voice was steel. "You need to trust them." Draven's jaw clenched. His hand shook with the effort of not running toward her. Trust. That's what it came down to, the thing he'd spent years forgetting how to do. He forced himself to stay, to keep fighting, to believe his army would keep her alive. That's the cost of leadership nobody talks about, having to choose between what you want to protect and what you need to protect. Knowing people you care about are in danger and trusting others to save them while you handle your own impossible situation. That division of focus is what breaks most rulers. They try to be everywhere at once and end up failing everywhere. The ones who survive learn to carry that weight without collapsing. A rebel captain charged Draven, sword raised, screaming. Draven's blade moved, clean, fast. The captain's head separated from his shoulders mid-stride. Another soldier came, then 3 more. Draven killed them all. His movements were mechanical, efficient, no wasted energy, just the brutal calculus of survival. But his mind was on the eastern flank, on Golden Light and Silver Cubs and the woman who'd somehow become more important than the Empire. Hold, he told himself, just hold. Vesper watched the battle turn from his command position, his perfect plan falling apart, his carefully recruited forces fracturing, everything collapsing because he'd underestimated one simple fact. Draven wasn't weak. He'd just been choosing not to show his full strength. And the healer, the god's damned healer with her impossible magic. Vesper's hands clenched on his reins. He'd spent 2 years building this rebellion, 2 years placing loyalists, 2 years convincing noble houses that Draven had become compromised. And it was dying in front of him because a common-born woman could heal soldiers faster than they could be killed. He made a decision born from panic, gestured to his personal guard. 20 soldiers, elite, loyal only to him. The healer. Kill her. Without her magic, their morale collapses. The soldiers moved, fast, efficient, cutting through battle lines toward where golden light still flashed. Seraphine didn't see them coming. She was too focused on healing, on saving lives, on proving that power could protect instead of destroy. The cubs saw. They stepped forward, 3 silver shadows forming a wall between Seraphine and death. The guards attacked. What happened next would be whispered about for generations. The cubs transformed, not fully, not into the massive beast they'd become as adults, but enough. They grew, doubled in size. Their eyes blazed like captured stars. Their snarls became something that predated human language. Royal bloodline magic, the kind that only appeared when true heirs were threatened. And they tore into Vesper's elite guards like vengeance given flesh. Men screamed, died, fell apart under claws and fangs that moved faster than eyes could follow. Armor meant nothing. Training meant nothing. Experience meant nothing against creatures that had been bred for 1,000 years to protect the crown. Within 30 seconds, all 20 guards were dead or dying. The cubs stood over the bodies, silver fur matted with blood, eyes locked on Vesper's position across the battlefield. Then they howled. The sound cut through battle noise, through screaming and steel and chaos, a harmonic that felt like it came from the bones of the earth itself. Every wolf in Valedryn answered, from the forests, from the mountains, from everywhere the old magic still lived, hundreds of them, pouring onto the battlefield, not attacking, just surrounding Draven's forces like a living wall. The rebel army saw it and broke, not retreat, pure panic. Men throwing down weapons and running, formations dissolving, officers screaming orders nobody followed, because this wasn't war anymore. This was divine judgment. House Merrick's soldiers surrendered, dropped weapons, knelt in the mud. House Thane's cavalry fled, rode hard for their home territories. House Corvin's veterans just stopped, stood there, waiting for whatever came next. The battle was over. Valedryn had won. And that's how empires survive. Not through superior tactics or better weapons. Through moments when power becomes mythic, when victory feels inevitable because the universe itself seems aligned against your enemies. Draven had never planned this, could never have orchestrated it. But the cubs' transformation and the wolves' arrival turned a battle into a story. And stories last longer than swords. Duppets. Draven found Seraphine on the eastern flank. She was sitting in blood-soaked grass, exhausted, shaking. The cubs pressed against her on all sides, returned to their normal size but still streaked with blood. Around her, hundreds of wolves waited, silent, watching. He dismounted, walked toward her slowly. The wolves parted. Let him through. He knelt beside her. His armor was covered in blood, his face carved from exhaustion and something deeper. You could have died. I know. Her voice was barely audible. You used magic in front of the entire army. Every house in the Empire saw. I know. They're going to fear you, try to control you, demand I eliminate the threat. Draven's hand found hers. I won't let them. Seraphine looked up, met his eyes. This changes everything. You know that. Everything already changed. The moment I chose you over the Empire's expectations. He pulled her to her feet. Around them, the battlefield was carnage. Thousands dead. Thousands more wounded. Rebel forces in chains or fleeing. Victory. But the kind that tasted like ash. Cain appeared. His expression was carefully neutral. Your Majesty, we've captured Vesper. He's requesting terms. Draven's eyes went flat. No terms. No trial. No mercy. Your Majesty. He orchestrated civil war, got thousands killed, manipulated noble houses into treason. Draven's voice dropped to something inhuman. He dies tonight, publicly, so everyone understands what happens to traitors who push me past mercy. Seraphine's hand tightened on his. Wait. No. This isn't negotiable. Listen to me. She forced him to look at her. You give him a trial. You let houses see that justice still exists. You prove that choosing mercy once doesn't mean you've lost the capacity for necessary brutality. He's guilty. Everyone knows it. Then let the trial prove it. Let witnesses testify. Let evidence speak. And when he's convicted, when everyone agrees he deserves death, execute him under law instead of rage. Draven's jaw clenched. His entire body vibrated with fury barely contained. Why? Why protect him with legal process he doesn't deserve? Because you're not protecting him. You're protecting yourself. The moment you start executing people without trial is the moment you become your father. The words hit like arrows. Draven stood there, covered in blood, drowning in rage, every instinct screaming to just kill Vesper and be done with it. But she was right. He knew she was right, and that made it worse, because rage is easy. Rage is clean. It burns everything away and leaves you feeling righteous. But justice requires control, requires acknowledging that even people you hate deserve process. That's what separates rulers from tyrants, not the absence of anger, the willingness to channel it through systems instead of letting it run wild. Fine. His voice was gravel. Trial tomorrow. Public. Every noble house present. And when he's convicted, I execute him personally. Fair. Cain bowed. I'll make arrangements. He left. Draven turned back to Seraphine. The fury in his eyes was still there. But something else too. Gratitude. Terrible and unwanted. You're the only thing stopping me from becoming the monster everyone expects. I know. I hate it. I know that too. He pulled her close, held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. Around them, soldiers started the grim work of clearing bodies. Wolves melted back into forests. The sun began setting over a battlefield that would be remembered forever. And in his command tent, Vesper sat in chains, waiting for morning. Waiting for the trial that would decide whether Valedryn could actually be different. Or whether it was just the same empire with better lies. That night, Draven couldn't sleep. He stood on the palace walls, staring at stars that didn't care about empires or justice, or the cost of choosing mercy. Seraphine found him there. The cubs followed, always present, always watching. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him. After a long silence, he spoke. 3,000 dead. His voice was hollow. Loyal soldiers who died because I offered terms instead of just attacking. Because I tried to do this differently. And 5,000 rebels who surrendered instead of fighting to the death. 5 houses that didn't burn. Families that still have fathers and sons. That's not good enough. It never is. Seraphine's voice was quiet. That's the burden. Knowing you saved some lives while losing others. Knowing every choice has a body count. So what's the point? Why try if people die anyway? Because the alternative is accepting that slaughter is inevitable. that brutality is the only answer, and the moment you accept that, you've lost everything that makes ruling worth surviving. Draven was quiet. Then, tomorrow I execute Vesper, after the trial, after everyone agrees he's guilty. I'm going to cut off his head personally. I know. You're not going to try to stop me? No. Seraphine looked at him. Some people earn death. The difference is whether you kill them out of rage or justice, whether their death means something or just feeds the cycle. And you think a trial makes murder meaningful? I think it makes murder accountable. That's all justice ever is. Accountability for the powerful. They stood in silence. Below, the capital slept, unaware that tomorrow would decide what kind of empire they lived in. Draven's hand found Seraphine's, held tight. If this goes wrong, if nobles revolt or houses fracture or the trial turns into chaos, then we handle it, together. He turned, looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and still somehow found hope. I don't deserve you. You've said that before. It's still true. Seraphine smiled, tired, real. Then spend your life earning what you don't deserve. That's all any of us can do. He kissed her, desperate, grateful, terrified. When they broke apart, dawn was starting to break over Valedryn. A new day, a new test. The trial that would prove whether empires could change. Inside the dungeon, Vesper waited. He'd spent the night preparing, rehearsing arguments, planning how to turn justice into theater. He thought he still had cards to play. He was wrong, because the trial wasn't about him. It was about proving that power could be accountable, that even kings could choose process over vengeance, that the hard path was still worth walking. The sun rose over the capital. Citizens gathered in the great square. Every noble house sent representatives, and in the center of it all, a throne waited. Not for a king, for judgment. The trial began at noon. The great square overflowed with citizens, thousands packed into every available space, on balconies, hanging from windows, pressed against barricades that barely held them back. They weren't here for justice, they were here for blood. Seraphine stood beside Draven on the raised platform. The cubs sat at her feet, silver eyes watching the crowd with unnerving intelligence. Every noble house had sent representatives. Some stood close, showing loyalty. Others kept distance, hedging their bets. In the center of it all sat a throne. Not Draven's. A simple chair reserved for the accused. Vesper was brought out in chains. He looked smaller than Seraphine remembered. Older. The confident chancellor who'd orchestrated rebellion, now just a man facing consequences he'd never believed would come. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. He thought he could talk his way out of this. Draven stood. The crowd went silent. His voice carried across the square without effort. Lord Chancellor Vesper stands accused of treason, of conspiracy, of orchestrating civil war that killed 3,000 loyal soldiers. This trial will determine guilt. Evidence will be presented. Witnesses will testify. And when judgment is rendered, it will be final. He looked at Vesper. You have the right to defend yourself, to call witnesses, to challenge evidence. This is not execution disguised as justice. This is justice regardless of outcome. The words cost him. Seraphine could see it in the tension across his shoulders. Every instinct screamed to just end this, to kill the man who'd betrayed him and move on. But he was choosing differently, because this is what separates civilization from brutality. Not the absence of anger, not the elimination of consequence, just the willingness to let process happen even when you already know the ending. That patience is what makes justice real instead of theater. Vesper stood. Chains rattled. Your Majesty, I thank you for this opportunity to present truth, to explain actions that were never about betrayal, but about protecting an empire from a king who'd lost his way. Gasps from the crowd. Draven's expression didn't change. Continue. You changed, Vesper said. His voice was smooth, practiced. The king who returned from the Eastern campaign wasn't the same man who left. You'd become compromised, distracted by a common healer, weakened by sentiment. He gestured towards Seraphine. I tried to counsel you, tried to remind you that power requires focus, but you wouldn't listen. So I did what any loyal advisor would do. I attempted to save the empire from a ruler who'd forgotten how to rule. The logic was poison wrapped in silk. presenting treason as duty, rebellion as protection. Seraphine watched nobles shifting, some nodding, others frowning. The trial wasn't just about Vesper, it was about which version of power Valedryn wanted. The brutal efficiency of Draven's father, or something different, something that allowed for humanity without collapsing into weakness. Kain stepped forward. He carried documents, evidence collected over 3 days of interrogations. Lord Chancellor Vesper, did you or did you not coordinate with Lady Evelise to orchestrate grain shortages in northern provinces? Vesper's jaw tightened. I coordinated supply distributions. If there were shortages, it was due to mismanagement at lower levels. We have signed orders, your seal, directing shipments away from starving villages toward military stockpiles that didn't need them. Kain held up documents. We have testimony from merchants you bribed, from soldiers you placed in strategic positions, from couriers who carried messages between you and rebel houses. The general's voice was flat, dead. You didn't try to save the empire, you tried to destroy it so you could rebuild under your control. Lies. Vesper's composure cracked. Just slightly. Fabrications from a king desperate to justify his weakness. Then explain the correspondence we found. Kain produced letters, your handwriting, promising House Corvin tax exemptions if they supported rebellion, offering House Thane expanded territories, guaranteeing House Merrick control of northern trade routes. He read from one letter. The king has become compromised beyond recovery. When he falls, those who supported this transition will be rewarded with positions befitting their loyalty. Silence crashed down. Vesper's face went white. Those were contingency plans, in case His Majesty became completely unfit. Standard protocol for any advisor concerned about succession. Succession happens when kings die. Kain's eyes were ice. You orchestrated war to kill a king who was very much alive. The evidence mounted. Testimony from captured soldiers, financial records showing bribes, intercepted messages detailing strategy. Each piece drove deeper into Vesper's defense. The crowd watched, transfixed, watching a man who'd served 3 kings get torn apart by his own machinations. And this is the tragedy of those who confuse ambition with wisdom. Vesper had spent decades believing he understood power better than the rulers he served, that his position behind the throne made him smarter than those sitting on it. But understanding tactics isn't the same as understanding people. He'd calculated everything except the possibility that Draven might actually change, that a king could evolve without becoming weak. Finally, Draven stood. Do you deny orchestrating rebellion? Vesper's shoulders sagged. Just slightly. I deny nothing. His voice lost its smoothness, became something raw. I did everything I'm accused of, because I watched you become something your father would have despised, soft, sentimental, ruled by a woman with dangerous power. He looked at Seraphine with pure hatred. You were supposed to execute her, eliminate the threat, prove you still understood that survival requires hard choices. Instead, you kept her, protected her, let her influence rot your judgment. So yes, I conspired. I organized. I did whatever was necessary to save this empire from a king who'd forgotten that mercy is weakness. The admission hung in the air like smoke. The crowd erupted, some shouting for execution, others stunned into silence. Draven raised his hand. Quiet returned. You're right about one thing. I changed. I stopped believing that ruling meant becoming inhuman. Stopped accepting that power requires you to sacrifice everything that makes life worth protecting. He descended from the platform, walked toward Vesper. My father built this empire through fear, through brutality, through the philosophy that strength only comes from domination. And it worked. For 40 years it worked. Draven stopped 3 feet away. Then it killed him. Poisoned by people who hated what he'd become. Died alone because he'd eliminated anyone capable of genuine loyalty. That's the cost of your philosophy. It works until it doesn't. And then it devours you. Vesper's voice was bitter. Better to be devoured by your methods than destroyed by your weakness. We'll see. Draven turned to address the assembled nobles. The evidence is clear, the confession complete. Lord Chancellor Vesper orchestrated treason. The penalty is death. But I'm offering one final choice. The crowd leaned forward. Vesper can die by execution, public, immediate. a spectacle to remind everyone what happens to traitors. Draven's voice went quiet. Or he can choose exile, stripped of title, forbidden from ever returning, sent beyond our borders to live out his days, knowing the empire he tried to destroy survived without him. Gasps. Outrage. Confusion. You can't offer mercy to traitors, someone shouted. I'm not offering mercy. Draven's eyes were steel. I'm offering a choice, death with the satisfaction of being important enough to execute, or exile with the knowledge that he failed so completely we don't even consider him worth killing. The cruelty of it was surgical. Vesper understood immediately, saw the trap. Execution made him a martyr, exile made him irrelevant, and irrelevance was worse than death. Choose. Draven's voice was flat. Vesper stood there, chains hanging heavy, face carved from rage and humiliation. Then he straightened, found some dignity buried beneath failure. I choose execution. I won't give you the satisfaction of watching me slink away. Kill me and prove your mercy was always just theater. So be it. Draven gestured. Guards brought forward the execution block, the same one that had seen countless deaths over generations of brutal rule. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for violence. Seraphine's stomach twisted. She'd known this was coming, had argued for the trial specifically so this moment would carry weight instead of rage. But watching it happen was different. Vesper was placed on his knees, head positioned. The executioner stepped forward, axe gleaming in afternoon sun. Draven raised his hand. The signal. Wait! Seraphine's voice cut through silence. Every head turned. She stepped forward. The cubs followed. Draven's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? Stopping you from making a mistake. This isn't your decision. No, but it affects the empire we're trying to build. She looked at Vesper, then at the crowd. You want him dead because he betrayed you, orchestrated war, got thousands killed. Those are all valid reasons. Justice demands consequence. Her voice carried. But what message does execution send? That we're still the same empire. That betrayal earns the same brutal response it always has. That nothing actually changed. Draven's jaw tightened. He earned death. Maybe. But what if exile isn't mercy? What if it's worse? Let him live knowing he failed. Let him watch from beyond our borders as the empire he claimed to protect thrives without him. Let him die old and forgotten instead of martyred and remembered. The crowd murmured. Uncertain, Vesper's voice was raw. I don't want your pity. This isn't pity. Seraphine's eyes were hard. This is consequence. You claimed the king was weak, that choosing differently would destroy the empire, so we're going to prove you wrong by letting you live long enough to see it. She turned to Draven. Show them power isn't just about killing. Show them restraint requires more strength than brutality. And this is the moment that defines everything. When conviction meets reality and you discover whether change was real or just performance, Draven could execute Vesper. It would be justice, would satisfy the crowd, would prove he still understood consequences. But it would also prove Vesper right, that underneath the mercy and sentiment, he was still his father's son. Draven stood perfectly still. The entire square held its breath. Then he lowered his hand. Exile. Permanent. Effective immediately. The crowd exploded. Half in approval, half in outrage. Draven's voice cut through chaos. Anyone who questions this decision can join him. I'm done explaining why strength comes in forms you're too limited to understand. He turned to Vesper. You have until sunset to leave Valedryn. If you're found within our borders after dark, the exile becomes execution. No trial, no mercy, just death. Vesper's face twisted. You're making a mistake, probably, but it's my mistake to make. Guards removed Vesper's chains, hauled him to his feet. He looked at Draven with something that might have been respect buried under hatred. You won't survive this. Sentiment will destroy you eventually, then I'll die knowing I tried something different. Vesper was dragged away. The crowd dispersed slowly, confused, disappointed at being denied blood, but unable to deny they'd witnessed something unprecedented. A king choosing restraint when violence would have been easier. Seraphine moved beside Draven. The cubs pressed against both of them. You just made enemies. I've had enemies since birth. His voice was tired. At least these ones are angry because I refused to kill rather than because I killed too much. That's progress? It's something, They stood together watching the sun descend toward the horizon, watching Vesper being escorted toward the northern gates, watching an empire try to process the idea that power could be wielded without becoming monstrous. And here's what nobody tells you about choosing differently. It doesn't feel triumphant, doesn't feel like victory, just exhaustion and uncertainty, and the nagging question of whether you made the right call. But that discomfort is the point. The moment leading feels easy, you've stopped questioning yourself. And leaders who stop questioning become tyrants. 3 months passed. Spring came to Valedryn slowly, rebuilding what war had destroyed, healing what violence had broken. The northern provinces received grain shipments, real ones this time, distributed fairly under Seraphine's supervision. Noble houses who'd supported rebellion were fined, not executed, not exiled, just held accountable through reduced influence and supervised reconstruction. It wasn't perfect. Some nobles grumbled. Some soldiers questioned whether mercy toward traitors would encourage future rebellion. But the empire held. More importantly, it started changing. Draven established councils with actual power to question royal decisions. Not enough to override him, but enough to force justification for policies. He reduced military spending, redirected resources toward infrastructure, started building the kind of empire that citizens wanted to protect instead of one they feared. It was slow, painful, constantly questioned, but it was real. Seraphine worked beside him, not as decoration, as genuine advisor. The nobles who'd feared her magic learned to accept it, mostly because watching her heal injured workers or sick children made opposition feel petty. The cubs grew, not fully, but enough that walking through the palace with 3 wolf-sized companions made clear statements about power and protection. On a morning in late spring, Draven found Seraphine in the gardens. She was tending medicinal herbs, dirt under her nails, hair tied back, looking exactly like the healer he'd met in the forest months ago. Except now she wore silver, royal colors, the mark of someone who belonged. "You're up early," she said without turning. "Couldn't sleep. Nightmares?" "Strategy. There's a difference." She stood, brushed dirt from her hands. "What kind of strategy?" "The kind where I ask you something important and risk you saying no." Seraphine's pulse kicked up. "Ask." Draven moved closer. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed nervousness. "Marry me." The words hung between them. Not political alliance, not strategic necessity, just marry me. Help me build this empire into something worth protecting. Stand beside me when I'm drowning in decisions. Remind me I'm human when I forget. He took her hand. "I don't have pretty speeches prepared. Don't know how to make this romantic. I just know that trying to rule without you feels like suffocating, and I'm done pretending I can do this alone." Seraphine's throat tightened. "Your nobles will hate it. Common-born healer marrying the king. Half the court will revolt." "Let them. I've stopped making decisions based on what others expect. This changes everything. Everything already changed. This just makes it official." She looked at him. Really looked. Saw the man who'd spent years becoming a monster finally learning to be human again. Saw the exhaustion and determination and desperate hope that choosing differently might actually work. Saw someone worth fighting for. "Yes." The word came out barely audible. Draven's expression cracked, relief flooding through. He pulled her close, kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the cubs were watching with expressions that might have been approval. "This won't be easy," Seraphine said. "Building something new never is." "I know. People will question us, test us, wait for us to fail." "I know that too. And some days we'll wonder if Vesper was right. If sentiment really is weakness. If we're just delaying the inevitable collapse." Draven's hands cupped her face. "Then we face those doubts together. We question ourselves. We adapt. We keep trying even when it feels impossible." His voice was rough. "Because the alternative is accepting that power always corrupts, that ruling always requires becoming inhuman, and I refuse to believe that's the only way. That's what makes this worth it. Not the certainty of success, just the refusal to accept that brutality is inevitable. That's the real revolution, not overthrowing systems, just insisting every single day that there might be a better way and being willing to die trying to find it." Keats. The wedding happened 6 months later. Small ceremony. Nothing like the grand spectacle traditional royal marriages demanded. Just essential nobles and loyal soldiers and citizens who'd survived war together. Seraphine wore silver, simple gown, no crown. She'd refused that particular symbol. Draven wore black, but without armor for the first time in years. Looking almost vulnerable, they stood before assembled witnesses and made promises. Not about duty, not about empire, about choosing each other every day, even when it would be easier to walk away. About building something worth protecting instead of just maintaining power. About remembering that strength without compassion creates only ruins. When it finished, when they were officially bound, the crowd erupted. Not the forced celebration of political theater. Real joy. Real hope that maybe this empire could be different. The cubs howled. Wolves in distant forests answered. And for one moment, everything felt possible. That night, Draven and Seraphine stood on the palace walls. Below, the capital celebrated. Fires burned in squares, music drifted through streets, people laughing instead of cowering. "You did this," Seraphine said quietly. "We did this." "No, you made the hard choices. You changed when changing felt impossible." Draven's jaw tightened. "I'm still making brutal decisions, still executing criminals, still maintaining military power. But with restraint, with purpose, with the understanding that power exists to protect instead of dominate. Is that enough?" "I don't know." Seraphine leaned against him. "But it's better than what came before. And maybe that's all progress ever is. Small improvements across generations until brutality stops being the default." They stood in silence. Then Draven spoke, voice rough with emotion he usually buried. "My father died hated, alone, poisoned by people who celebrated his death. I used to think that was the cost of ruling, that being feared meant being strong. And now? Now I think maybe the real strength is building something people want to protect, creating loyalty through respect instead of terror, dying old with someone who chose to stay instead of dying alone with only subjects who couldn't leave." He turned to face her. "You saved me. Not from Evelise or Vesper or rebellion, from becoming something that would have destroyed everything I touched. We saved each other." Seraphine's voice was steady. "You gave me purpose beyond just surviving, showed me that even broken people can rebuild themselves." They kissed, gentle, tired, real. When they separated, dawn was breaking over Valedryn. A new day, a new empire, still flawed, still struggling, but trying. And sometimes trying is enough. Years passed. The empire changed slowly, brutally, constantly questioned. Draven never became soft, never stopped being capable of violence when necessary. But the violence became measured, purposeful, last resort instead of first response. Seraphine established healing centers, trained others in medicine, slowly normalized the idea that power could nurture instead of just destroy. The cubs grew into massive wolves, bonded to both Draven and Seraphine, living symbols of royal authority tempered by compassion. Some nobles adapted, others fled to territories where old philosophies still reigned. Border wars still happened. Criminals still earned execution. Hard decisions still demanded impossible choices. But the empire survived. More importantly, it evolved. Visitors from other kingdoms came expecting the brutal efficiency of Draven's father, found instead an empire that balanced strength with restraint, that protected fiercely but didn't conquer needlessly. Some called it weakness. Others called it wisdom. Draven stopped caring which. On a winter evening, 5 years after the rebellion, he found Seraphine in the library. She was reading reports, always working, never stopping. He moved behind her, wrapped arms around her shoulders. "Come to bed. In a minute. This grain distribution needs someone who isn't exhausted to review it." His voice was gentle. "You're allowed to rest. So are you. I'm working on it." She turned in his arms, studied his face. The lines were deeper now, the scars more prominent, but the hollow exhaustion had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing differently, wondering if Vesper was right?" "Every day, really, every single day." Draven's voice was honest, raw. I question whether mercy was smart, whether restraint weakens us, whether this empire would be stronger if I just stayed brutal. And then I look at what we've built. Citizens who trust their king instead of fearing him. Soldiers who fight because they believe in something instead of just following orders. An empire that might actually outlive me because it's built on something more than terror. He kissed her forehead. So, yeah, I regret it. I question it. I wonder if we're just delaying inevitable collapse. But I'd make the same choices again. Because this is the truth about changing. It never feels certain, never feels complete. Just a constant process of choosing better options while knowing you might be wrong. That uncertainty is what keeps you human, what prevents the arrogance that destroys rulers. They stood together in the quiet library. Outside, snow fell over the capital, covering old scars, promising renewal. The empire would face new challenges, new threats, new moments where brutality tempted and mercy felt naive, but they'd face them together. Building something imperfect but trying, creating an empire where power protected instead of devoured, where strength came from conviction instead of domination, where a king could be human without becoming weak. It wasn't a fairy tale, wasn't guaranteed to succeed, but it was real. And sometimes real is all that matters. Because the most dangerous thing isn't becoming a monster, it's accepting that monsters are inevitable. Draven and Seraphine refused that acceptance, chose instead to fight for something better. One impossible decision at a time. Until the day they died, old and together, having built an empire that remembered them not for brutality, but for daring to believe that power could be wielded without becoming poison, that mercy could coexist with strength, that love wasn't weakness, but the thing that made survival worth fighting for. The cubs, now ancient wolves, outlived them both. Guardians of an empire that had learned, slowly and painfully, that the crown doesn't have to devour. It can protect. If you're brave enough to let it.